That's a used Tesla Model S, and you're wondering, is it worth buying? Because it's depreciated by quite a lot of money. Brand new back in 2016, this thing would have cost you over $160,000 here in Australia. Now, with this 90D version of the Model S, you're looking at around $60,000 to buy one on the second-hand market. Now, I've borrowed this Model S to find out if it's actually worth buying one of these used, or should you just save your money and go buy a brand new Model 3 for the same amount of cash. Now, before I get started, if you have a used Tesla just like this one and want to review it and tell everyone what it's like to own, make sure you go to productreview.com.au, because there you're going to be able to leave a review of your own car, and you can read reviews of other people who've owned other cars to see if they're worth buying. Now, at the time, there were two different body styles, because this was transitioning into this facelifted version, which you see here, which gets a new grille design, where the old one had a black grille, but they got rid of that in favor for this design. Now, this has had a few tweaks here and there, but this is pretty much the same design you'll find today if you buy a Model S. But here's the thing, you can't buy a Tesla Model S anymore here in Australia. They stopped selling those a little while ago. No one really knows why, but it could be due to demand, or it could be due to production issues, but that's why you're going to see a lot more Model 3s and Model Ys driving around instead of these older Model S's. Now, this Model S is 7 years old, and it's done around 99,000 kilometers. So it hasn't done a lot of kilometers, but it is getting old in terms of age. Now, the original range for this 90D was 557 kilometers according to the NEDC estimate, but apparently according to other websites, it was around 455 kilometers real world range when new. Now, this uses a lithium ion 90 kilowatt hour capacity battery, but only around 85.5 of that is usable, and it's using a 400 volt battery architecture system, which is a bit outdated compared to the new 800 volt battery architecture systems that are being used on cars like Hyundais and newer Teslas. Now, in terms of the exterior build quality, the shut lines and all the sort of panel gaps are a little bit wider than I would have liked, but they actually don't look too bad, especially the window trim around the side here. It actually lines up relatively well for a Tesla of this period. Now, Teslas of this period were not known for having great build quality because they were built out of Fremont, and according to all Tesla owners, those early Fremont cars were not the best built, and we'll see why that is in just a second. But I want to show you some features first. Of course, we have LED lights up front, which are quite nice, and then what I do like is that we actually do get a front trunk. Now, even though this is an older Tesla, you can still control it via the Tesla app, which is pretty cool. So I can unlock the front just like this, and it will reveal some space. But what's surprising to me is that even some EVs today do not offer a frunk of this size. This is a decent amount of space under here, even though it is smaller because this is the dual motor setup, because under here is the front motor and between the rear wheels and the back is the rear motor. But if you didn't have the dual motor and you just had the single motor option, like a 75 or the early 85 cars, you would have a larger frunk area. Now, I will compliment the Model S in terms of its design. Franz von Holhausen was responsible for the design of the Model S, and it's still a very good looking car today, and it's aged very well, because a lot of people were surprised to know that this car is 7 years old. Now, of course, you're getting alloy wheels. These aren't the big fancy ones you'll see on the P90. Instead, these are just the smaller ones. You've also got these Tesla flashes here on the side for your indicators, which is quite nice. You have power folding mirrors, and of course, you have the famous pop-out door handles. Now, this has been a point of failure for a lot of cars. For this car, it hasn't been, but this is something to keep an eye on in case they go wrong. And of course, there's lots of chrome trim around here, but there's no sunroof on this car. But I think it's really cool for an older car like this. You can tell the air suspension to adjust at this precise location, or wherever you want it to raise or lower, because it means you don't have to go in and change it every time you need to go into your own driveway. Now, for an older electric car, this actually still charges relatively fast. It can accept up to 120 kilowatts of fast charge, and it will take around 42 minutes to charge this from 10 to 80%, which is actually pretty good. But here's the thing, this uses an older style of plug that you'll find at a Tesla Supercharger. Now, Tesla Superchargers have two types of plugs, which is very good because it means you don't need an adapter. But if you want to charge anywhere else and not at home, you'll have to use an adapter, or you can go to Tesla to get this changed out for a more updated plug, which means it can be used pretty much everywhere. But to be honest, this isn't really an issue if you're just driving around the city, parking your garage, or have a Tesla Supercharger nearby, or are just using Tesla Superchargers. So you won't have to go to that expense to change it out. But if you don't have any of those nearby, or you don't have a garage charging solution, you probably are better off going to Tesla to get this changed out. And also, look how cute this little charging port is. Now, at the back, you do get a giant hatchback and not a traditional trunk opening, which is very good because it means you get a ton of space here in the back. It's very practical, and is a clear reason why the Model S was so popular and still is with many families. Now, there's so much space in here, there's even a false false floor that gives you even more space under here. So the packaging of this car was brilliant. And you could even have optioned this with a 7-seat configuration. There was 2 rear-facing seats here, and they used this as the footwell, which was very good for any sort of smaller adults or kids that you wanted to jam into the back of a Model S. But they got rid of that option, which is a bit disappointing because I thought that was pretty unique. Now, this does make some creaking sounds when it opens, which doesn't sound very good. And also the plastic around the button here just feels so cheap. So it's just something that a lot of people are going to complain about the build quality of Tesla Model S's. And I just think that some of the material choices here were perhaps a little on the cheap side to help bring costs a little lower, but they haven't really aged too well. And even spending $60,000, this doesn't feel so good compared to modern Teslas. Now these cars have actuators instead of actual door handles. So when you pull a door handle, it actually pops the door instead of acting like a proper mechanical handle. Now sitting here in the back, it's got a nice flat load floor. We have some air vents, but we don't have any USB-C ports or any USB-A ports here in the back for these passengers because that's just how old Model S's were fitted out. We don't even have an armrest back here, but we do have plenty of space. And we have these nice frameless doors as well. So it's pretty comfortable for longer trips in the back. And you can fit 3 adults here just fine because this car is nice and wide and has a flat load floor all the way through. And materials back here feel pretty nice and upmarket, and it just does feel like a very nice car here in the back in terms of just materials. Now, if you want to fold these seats down, they fold in a 60-40 split, which means that you will have to sacrifice some seat room if you want to get more boot room. But that boot is enormous, so I'll be surprised if you can't carry 4 adults and their luggage with all the seats up. Now, in terms of the quality of the materials in here, this seat's sort of wearing away a little bit after 7 years of use, so that's a bit weird to see, and there's some plastic trim sort of raising up around the door sills, but this door here is the main problem for this car. Now, this door trim's coming quite loose, and it means it creates quite a lot of sound when you open and close this door, and it feels a bit cheap and something that would have to get fixed, but I'm not too sure how easy will be to fix this and secure it back in place. Now, on paper, this car has a lot of nice features. It has lots of suede, lots of stitching, lots of leather, and these nice electric heated leather seats up front. And you also got this electronic controlled steering column here, which is nice and easy to get adjusted. You have 2 screens as well, and you have wood trim throughout this car. And the materials in here are quite nice. It's just the construction of them all. It just feels a little bit loose. Like we needed a few more rivets here and there to really secure this interior in place. And that means that if you play music with a lot of bass, this interior does rattle a little bit, and it actually doesn't take a lot of bass at all to get this interior to start rattling, and you can especially hear that on phone calls as well. So it's a bit disappointing that this car's not really holding up. But I'll be brutally honest that if you really want a Tesla Model S, this interior still is relatively nice, and it will still wow enough people. It's comfortable, it feels luxurious enough, but it's just the choice of how these materials were put together that does let down this inside of this Tesla Model S just a little bit. But what's nice is that all the markings on the steering wheel haven't worn off, especially around the window controls as well, and the shifter and the stalks all look quite nice, and the headliner feels nicely put in place. But yeah, it's an early build Model S, but for the most part this feels like it's held up okay. Now here's another thing, that the floor mats are coming apart, so you're gonna have to re-glue these to your floor mats if you want them to stick. So that's happening on the driver's side. There's plenty of storage here in the middle. Everything works pretty well, which is nice. This wood trim looks great, feels good as well, but what's annoying is that around the armrest, they are scratching the wood trim. If you wanna slide these forward, you're gonna see some scratch marks on that wood, which is a bit disappointing. Now, you do have a button for your glove box, which works very well. You've also got a button for your hazards, and you have lots of stalks here. This is very important because a lot of Teslas, modern day Teslas, do not have any stalks at all. So if you like a Tesla with stalks, then you should buy an older Model S, because it has a shifter from a Mercedes-Benz to be able to actually physically shift into gear instead of using the screen. And you've also got a physical cruise control knob right here, which is something that you don't get on modern day Teslas. And you've also got a physical control for your wipers and your indicators. That's just something that's unheard of. So modern day Tesla people, yes, this is stalks. We have them back in the past, and they're here and they're very useful. cool. But let me show you what's on this screen, because it's actually an older software compared to modern day Teslas. Now, it's worth noting that the owner of this car had this screen stop working on them entirely, so they had to get this replaced under warranty. So that's part of the electrical issues that these early Model S's have. But now it's working and been replaced, it's actually flawless and it's not having any issues at all. Now down here, you can have this toolbar down here for Spotify. As you can see here, even with a 3G connection, this is not connecting to Spotify, which I found to be very annoying. You have messages here, Bluetooth, and then you've also got your single reversing camera. You do not have multiple cameras on this car. That's why the owner has installed dash cameras for both front and rear, because this doesn't have Sentry mode. And you've also got a call button here to make phone calls and dial up using your phone. Now, they have pretty standard air conditioning controls here, but what's cool is that you do have dog mode in here and camping mode, which is still very useful, and nice updates that came to this car later on. But what else is cool is that you do have this biohazard control, which allows you to filter out any contaminants inside this car and keep you nice and safe from any gross sort of outside air. You've also got the heated seat controls there as well. Now, if we go into our more apps here, you can see our energy consumption here. So it's going to tell us our predicted range and also our instant range as well. So right now it says we're going to only have about 200 kilometers of range left at 357 kilometers indicated, and now at 357 kilometers indicated, we have an average range. We should see another 338 kilometers out of this charge, which is pretty cool. And you can see here trip information as well. Now you can go through and also go to your calendar. You've got arcade, so you can play games on this older Tesla, which is still very fun. And you've also got your toy box here, which will give you things like actually turning your car into the James Bond submarine, or you can turn your map into Mars, which is all very cool. And so that just looks great. So I love that. And it just has some really cool features in here that are a lot of fun. And of course, it has the fart on demand button here, which is always very fun. Now we've got a browser inbuilt here and a radio and also tune in. And we've also got Tidal built into this car as well. And that's really pretty much it. Now the car settings here are from the bottom right. You tap on that, you can control your lights if you want, if you don't want to do that via the stalk. And you can also go through here and control your car, and you can do your pedal and steering. Now this doesn't have ludicrous mode because this is just the 90D or any sort of crazy sorts of mode. So you just have a standard acceleration mode. You've got your difference between your steering modes, you've got regen, braking modes, you've got creep on and off, and you've also got a range mode as well to extend your range. And you've also got your suspension controls here, you have your charging controls here, you have your autopilot. So this does have a rudimentary form of autopilot, which is basically just cruise control with active lane keep assist. It works really well, but we'll test it in just a second. We've got our vehicle controls here. We have our lighting control. This does have ambient lights at night, which is pretty nice. Display controls, trip controls, navigation, safety, and also your servicing controls and also your software. So this thing has been checking for updates, and it will get security updates, but as you can see here, it's just checked and this is up to date. Even though this is an older software system, because this is using an older bit of hardware, it's still going to get over-the-air updates for security. Now, something that has popped up in this car is this warning light up here that you can see, and it says battery fuse requires replacement soon. So after supercharging, I was the one supercharging this car, and this warning popped up. So I looked up, this is going to be a couple $100 to replace, but that is one thing that's gone wrong in this car. But that should be a fairly inexpensive and easy to do service. But we should talk about the battery. Now, the biggest question most people have on their mind when they buy a used electric car is, will I have to replace the battery? Because battery replacements can be very expensive on Teslas, especially old ones, and you're looking at a price of anywhere between $20,000 to $40,000 and can go up from there depending on the type of battery you have. So yes, you want to make sure that your battery is in good health. Now, this hasn't done a whole bunch of kilometers for the age of the car. It's only done 100,000 kilometers, and over 7 years, that's not that many kilometers of driving. And so that means when I charge this up to 100%, I got about 487 kilometers of indicated range. Now, obviously this car isn't going to perfectly hit that amount of range because it depends on weather, depends on your driving style, and depends on if you're using air conditioning or not, all those sorts of things. But then what I found is that after driving 102.2 kilometers using 19.7 kilowatt hours and 193 watt hours per kilometer, I now have an indicated range of 327 kilometers. So on your screen now is the difference between 102.5 and 487, and my real range now is actually 327. So it's used a bit more, but to be honest, that's pretty good. That means this battery hasn't degraded all that much. So I'd be pretty confident buying this secondhand, knowing that I've got a decent amount of range, easily, hopefully over 400 kilometers of range if you're driving smartly or, you know, using your range controls and all that sort of stuff. What else is cool on this is, of course, we have battery preconditioning. So it means when we want to pull up to a supercharger and we use the center screen to navigate to one, which I'm doing right now, so we'll talk about charging when we get there, it's pretty good at being able to quickly charge. And that's part of the benefit of buying a Tesla, is that you've got good charging infrastructure, and also the fact this has free supercharging for life. That is a massive plus. So yes, free supercharging means when you bought these cars in the early stages, that's something that Tesla used to advertise. They used to say, buy a Tesla Model S or Model X and get free supercharging for life. That is transferable, so if you buy a used Model S, you will get free supercharging, which can be quite expensive if you are not getting that for free. So that is a major plus if you're going out road tripping or you like to use your local Tesla supercharger. Now, listen how quiet this car is. It really refuses to do any squeaks or rattles or anything dramatic, which is fantastic. Now, the only thing that becomes annoying are some of the looser panels in here when you're playing music through the speakers. The bass, even though I don't like my music that bassy, it just seems to rattle the car a little bit, which can be just a little bit detracting from the luxury car experience here. But I find the steering to be nice and responsive here. The throttle's nice and rapid as well. The regen braking works perfectly. Everything in this car works really well. The screens are responsive as well, and hard to say that this car feels like it's 7 years old. And with good care and hopefully things holding together and common issues not becoming common, you could run this thing probably for another 100, 200,000 kilometers using the same hardware. Now, the claim acceleration figure in this car is 4.4 seconds to go from 0 to 100 kilometers an hour, which is still very quick. So it is a decent bargain if you are looking for a faster electric car. And the all-wheel drive is perfect for putting down a nice amount of grip, even with some cheaper tires thrown on. The owner told me that these tires that are on this car weren't the most expensive tires, but the all-wheel drive system and traction control in here works perfectly in the wet. It's been raining heavily over the past couple of days when I've been testing this car and seeing what it's like to live with, and it's worked flawlessly. Now, it's cool to see that the camera's sensors can still pick up things like motorcyclists and other cars really well, and autopilot does work really well in this car. Now, autopilot's just a fancy name for radar cruise control in these older Teslas, but the self-steering and the speed management work better than some other cars that you can buy brand new. It's just really interesting to see how this tech has held up over this time period. It's something that easily could have fallen into irrelevancy, but it seems like with constant software updates up until the very last minute before this hardware couldn't really support any big software changes, it's done a pretty good job of just holding itself together. And that's the difference between this and a Model 3. A Model 3 feels good, but the materials don't feel as nice as in here. And also just like the driving experience of the Model S, because it's a bigger, wider car and it's heavy, it just feels really quite nice and luxurious. And I also love the fact we have a traditional dashboard setup here as well, which really helps with making this car feel a bit more familiar than, say, the single screen setup we see in the new Model Y and Model 3. And while it's a shame that we can't really use Apple CarPlay or Android Auto in here, Google Maps still works perfectly, so I really don't have a problem with that. Now, these seats aren't the most comfortable. I feel like these early Tesla seats did not really do a good job of ergonomics. These headrests are extremely firm, so they're not so comfortable, but you do have adjustable bolstering here and they are electric, so it's not too hard to get comfortable. So I'm probably at one of the noisiest superchargers in Sydney. It's an underground supercharger, and it's actually quite useful because it's in the middle of the city in Sydney. Now, this thing has a bunch of different chargers here, but the best thing about supercharging is that if you own a Tesla, you plug it in, and the car handles everything. So all your billing is usually in your screen, but because this is free, I just have to plug it in and I get ultra fast charging straight away. Now, my estimated time to fully charge this battery from around 250 kilometers of range all the way up to around 480 kilometers of indicated range, it's gonna take about 40 minutes. But to get to 80%, if I adjust it here, it should only take 10 minutes. So this is a really quick way to fill up if you need a bit more juice, obviously. And the best thing about this Tesla Supercharger network, it is that it is the most connected charging infrastructure in Australia. So you can go all the way from the top near Brisbane all the way down to Adelaide using the Supercharger network. Now, free supercharging is a massive plus if you get a Tesla Model S like this, and I can tell you now, it's not really having any troubles supercharging or charging, and the range seems to be holding up just fine for a used Tesla Model S. Now, I traveled 172.7 kilometers on my trip since I last fully charged, which means I used 29.6 kilowatt hours That means that you was using about 171 watt hours per kilometer. Now, that means I arrived here with 257 kilometers of indicated range. Yes, it is using a bit more battery than I would have liked to have seen, but that's pretty normal for most electric cars. So yeah, this is holding its battery charge pretty well with a small amount of depletion over 7 years. So you wouldn't really have to worry about replacing the battery in this Tesla anytime soon. But to be honest, if you can find a good deal on one of these and you're happy to run it out until it sort of inevitably becomes too expensive to fix, then yeah, it's still a brilliant car.